All right, this is lesson 4.1, part 2, pairs of lines and angles. In the first part of this lesson, we covered more about the pairs of lines and looked at the relationships between those lines. In this lesson, we'll look at the angles. To briefly review, we covered parallel lines, skew lines, parallel planes, and perpendicular lines in the previous lesson. So if you're looking at this figure here, you've got parallel lines that don't intersect and are in the same plane. Like M and N here are parallel lines. Okay, they don't intersect, don't have any points in common, but they are in the same plane. You can also notice in the figure these red arrows that are on the diagram. That's indicating that those two lines in particular are parallel lines. And so you can note that. So if you see two lines that have kind of extra arrows somewhere on the line, that's indicating that those two lines are related to each other. In particular, they are parallel. Then we talked about skew lines. Skew lines don't intersect, but they're not in the same plane. They're not coplanar. So like M and K here are not in the same plane, and they're not going to intersect. And so they are not, so they are skew lines. Okay, so they're not going to intersect. Okay, if I extend M out or extend K out, they're not going to intersect, and they're on different planes. You can see K is not on the same, not on plane T. And also there's parallel planes, which is just the same idea as parallel lines. These two planes that are not going to cross. Okay? And obviously they're on separate planes because they're two different planes. And then we also talked about perpendicular lines are just when two lines that intersect and they form a right angle. Okay, so two lines are perpendicular to each other if when they cross each other, when they intersect at that one point, they form a right angle. Their angles form right angles. It'd be four right angles actually, all the way around. So that's what we talked about last time. In this lesson, we're looking at the relationships between angles. Specifically four types of angles formed by two lines that are crossed by a transversal. Okay, and a transversal is just a line that is intersecting two or more lines. And so what we see here in this first picture in the top left are angles formed by a transversal that's crossing two lines. What they're called are corresponding angles when they are in corresponding positions. So angles 2 and 6 here are corresponding to each other because this angle 2 is on the top of this line on one side of the transversal, and angle 6 is on the top of its line on that same side of the transversal. Okay, we'd say those are in corresponding positions. Next is alternate interior angles. They're in between the two lines on different sides of the transversal. Hey, remember that transversal is the line that's crossing those two lines. And so alternate interior, alternate meaning opposite sides, interior meaning between the two lines. Those are alternate interior angles. Alternate exterior angles are on opposite sides of the transversal, but they're outside the two lines. So 1 and 8 here are alternate exterior angles. And then lastly are consecutive interior angles. They're on the same side of the transversal, but in between the two lines. Okay, on the same side of the transversal, in between the two lines. So those are the four types of angle pairs that we'll be looking at today. And so let's go ahead and look at some examples where we're identifying and clarifying what those are. All right, before we look at some examples, let me re-clarify what the word transversal means. So a transversal is a line that intersects two or more coplanar lines at different points. Okay, so it's crossing two lines. So like if we look down here in this figure right here, that transversal is crossing those two lines that would be coplanar to each other at different points. It's crossing one point here on this line and one point there on that line. So that's two different points. So that's just a transversal. Very simply, just a line that's intersecting two or more other lines. Okay, so you want to know what that term is because we'll use that a lot. So we've already talked about the different angle pairs. You might want to go back over that in your filled out notes or the beginning of this video to clarify that if you need to. So let's make sure we can identify these different types of angle pairs, okay, from a diagram. So 7, 8, 9, and 10 say identify all pairs of angles of the given type. And we're going to use this figure right here. So 7 says identify the corresponding angles. And if you remember, corresponding angles are on the same side of the transversal, okay, in the same position on the two different lines. Okay? So zoom in a little bit here. Corresponding angles in this case would be like 1 and 5. Okay? If you notice, they're kind of just repeated in different, the same angle in different positions. So here on this line, it's on this side, and here on this line, it's on that side. Okay? So those are corresponding angles to each other. So angles 1 and angles 5 are corresponding to each other. And the instructions say here to identify all the pairs of angles of this given type. So what are all the corresponding angles? Well, 3 and 7 would also be corresponding angles. Angle 3 and angle 7. Angle 2 and angle 6. And angles 4 and angles 8. So those are all the pairs of corresponding angles. And notice that, I'm separating them with a comma, the different pairs. So angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding to each other. Angle 7 and angle 3 are corresponding. Angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding. And angle 4 and angle 8 are corresponding to each other. Okay, so those are the different pairs. And all of these angle types, we're talking about pairs of angles. Okay, so just two of them. All right, so next let's look at alternate interior angles. Remember, those are angles on different sides of the transversal. Okay, and maybe you should note which one is the transversal. Okay, that's the transversal line cutting through. Okay, both of those lines are intersecting both of those lines. So the alternate interior angles are on different sides of the transversal between the two lines. Okay, so it should be in between these two lines. So angle 2 and angle 7 are alternate interior angles here, okay? Because they're on different sides of the transversal and they're in between the two lines. But then also angle 4 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. Okay? Again, those are the angles that are on different sides of the transversal between the two lines. Oops. All right, next is alternate exterior. Alternate exterior on different sides of the transversal outside of the two lines. Okay, so like angle 1 and angle 8 here are alternate exterior. And one angle is not necessarily one thing, right? You can see how, depending on how we're looking at them, there's different relationships between the angles. So one angle is not just one category of angle type. It depends on the pair that you're looking at. Okay, so it's identifying the different relationships between the different angles. So angle 1 and angle 8 are alternate exterior, and angle 3 and angle 6 are also alternate exterior. Okay, and the last one is consecutive interior. Consecutive interior are angles in between the two lines, interior, and consecutive meaning they're on the same side of the transversal. So angle 2 and angle 5 are consecutive interior. And then angle 4 and angle 7 are consecutive interior. Okay. So we're just trying to, again, make sense of the figures and the angles that we're looking at. And so these are some names or categories in which we define these angles. So that's going with the category and then looking for the angles in the figure. Let's kind of switch it around. And for number 11, classify the pair of numbered angles. So we're given numbered angles and we determine, are these corresponding alternate interior, alternate exterior, or consecutive interior. Okay. Do these last few on this page real quick. So number 3, what type of angles are 1 and 5? Okay. How do we define their relationship to each other? Well, if I notice, they're on the same side of the transversal, okay? So that means they need to be either consecutive interior or corresponding, because they're on the same side of the transversal. But they're not both in the interior, so they definitely can't be consecutive interior. But they are in corresponding positions, right? One's right here on this side of the line, and 5 is on the same side of its line, just in a different position. So they're in corresponding positions. So we would say these are corresponding angles. And number 4, we have 2 over here and 7 over here. Here's the transversal that's crossing those two lines, intersecting those two lines. So 2 and 7 are on opposite sides, okay, or alternate sides of the transversal. So it's either going to be alternate interior or exterior. And we notice that they're outside the two lines here. So that would be exterior. So these are alternate exterior angles. And then the last one, 4 and 5 here. 4 and 5 are on opposite sides of the transversal. Okay? So here's our transversal. 4 and 5 are on alternate sides or opposite sides of the transversal, and they're within the interior. Okay? They're in between the two lines here. So that would be alternate interior angles. So in identifying these angle relationships, you should be able to look at a figure and identify which ones are corresponding, which ones are alternate interior. And then if you're given the name and you want to find those different ones, you can figure out all of the angles in a figure, what's their relationship to each other.